It turns out that our brains are constructed so that emotional injuries activate the same parts of the brain as does a physical injury. And most doctors have no idea that that's true.
Hi, everyone. I suspect that far too many of us have heard the phrase, it's all in your head, usually from someone who truly doesn't get what's going on. Today's guest definitely isn't here to gaslight anyone. He's here to show us how the brain can generate real pain, real fatigue, and most importantly, real recovery. If you've been here with me for a while, welcome back. If you're new, I'm Raelan Agle, and this is where we dive into real stories and strategies for reclaiming health from conditions like ME/CFS, Long COVID, and other chronic conditions. No fluff, no false hope, just what actually works. You guys, it doesn't get much better than this. My guest today, for most people, requires no introduction. I am here with none other than the recovery guru, Dr. Howard Schubiner, joining in from Detroit, Michigan. In addition to studying with Dr. John Sarno, a pioneer in mind-body medicine, Dr. Schubiner is an internist and a pediatrician who attained the rank of full professor at Wayne State University School of Medicine. He is a clinical professor at the Michigan State College of Human Medicine and is a fellow in the American College of Physicians. He has authored more than 100 publications in scientific journals and is the author of 3 books: Unlearn Your Pain, Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression, and Hidden from View, written with Alan Abbas, MD. Dr. Schubiner is also part of the team that conducted the groundbreaking Boulder Back Study, along with others, including Alan Gordon, who, in addition to Dr. Schubiner, I quote on this channel incessantly. This study demonstrated that 75% of people with chronic back pain treated with a novel therapy called pain reprocessing therapy fully recovered. And this same therapy is something credited by countless people I interview here as key to their recovery from conditions like ME/CFS and Long COVID. Dr. Schubiner is a trailblazer in mind-body medicine, and he's helped thousands of people break free from chronic symptoms by rewiring the brain's response to pain, fatigue, and many other symptoms, including things like anxiety, depression, and even insomnia. So, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Howard Schubiner. Dr. Schubiner, so incredible to have you here today. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here, Raelan.
I know my viewers are going to be or are absolutely thrilled to be hearing from you. And most of the people who watch this channel, listen to the podcast, are people facing conditions like ME/CFS and Long COVID. And I know a lot of your work has centered around or started with chronic pain. And, we have been piggybacking quite a bit on the science of chronic pain, those of us with these other conditions. So, just to start out, so people know, your approach is the work that you do. Is it just chronic pain, or what does this all apply to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I started out working with people with chronic pain, with headaches, with migraine, with back pain, with stomach pain, pelvic pain, etc., and fibromyalgia, of course, chronic widespread pain. And I was having incredible results. I was blown away, mid-career in my career. All of a sudden, I'm doing things that not just people coping with their pain, but actually reversing it. And the pain could have been devastating and severe, and often it is, and for years. And I'm seeing these amazing results. I'm going, holy cow, that is amazing. And then I would see people where their pain would go away, but they would get anxious, or they had pain and depression, or they had pain and anxiety and depression and fatigue. And I started seeing that these different symptoms, so to speak, kind of worked in the same way. They worked in the same way in terms of occurring in relation to stressful life events, occurring in the absence of significant, obvious medical structural disorders, and responding to this type of mind-body treatment that we were doing. So, I wrote my first book, Unlearn Your Pain, and then I had to write another book, Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression, right? And I should probably write another book, Unlearn Your Fatigue, but I'm writing a new book now that's going to cover all of it.
Yeah, I read Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression, and my head exploded. I had never thought about anxiety and depression as symptoms that could be created and alleviated in the same way as the chronic pain and the exhaustion and all of the and insomnia even, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many different things. It's really incredible to learn, really empowering that we have some ability
Yeah.
to reverse these.
Well, it's amazing because it really starts with how the brain works and the neuroscience of how the brain works. And I harp on this because people want to, not that they want to think, but it's the natural tendency to think that if you're suffering
Mhm.
with real fatigue, real pain, real anxiety, and it's real, of course, it's not made up, it's not imaginary, it's not in your head. But if you're suffering with that, there must be something wrong with your body. Who in their right mind would think of anything else? But the neuroscience of the brain, which is called predictive processing, tells us that our brains literally create what we experience, which sounds like a woo-woo, concept, like, oh, well, yeah, I create my experience, like I'm high, man. But it's actually true. We see with our brain. We can see in our sleep when we dream. We see with our brain. We hear with our brain, and we feel with our brain. What we feel in our body is literally created by our brain. When you catch a cold, you have a virus, you're going to have, if it's an upper respiratory virus, you're going to have runny nose, cough, sore throat. That's direct effect of the virus on our body, and receptors that create inflammation and all this stuff that's, your body has to do to fight off an infection. But when you get fatigue due to a virus, you get an acute virus and you feel tired, that is actually the brain response to protect us, to slow us down, to give us rest. It's not actually from the virus itself. And that shows the power of the brain to create what we see, what we hear, and what we feel in our body. So that beginning point, and I could talk all day about this, but there's some incredible books that people should read to understand the power of the brain has over us. And so if our danger signal, our brain feels endangered, it's going to create a message. It's like a smoke alarm. And the smoke alarm might cause fatigue. It can be overwhelming fatigue, but still due to the brain, or overwhelming pain or anxiety. And that is the amazing thing. That is mind-blowing and revolutionary. And most doctors have no idea that that's true.
And that's validating to hear, because it's really challenging for us layman folks to wrap our heads around this. It's a completely different way of thinking. And most people that I interview on this channel who alleviate their symptoms from these conditions, step one for them was understanding how symptoms are created. Because most of us think, our arm hurts, something in there is causing the pain. Or like you said, you get a virus and that fatigue is the virus doing it to your body and somehow causing that fatigue. And you'd mentioned that you had learned, after medical school that, pain can exist in the absence of structural damage in the body, or there can be structural abnormalities or tissue damage or some sort of pathology, but there's no pain.
Exactly. Exactly. That is the key point. You can have an injury and have no pain. You can have pain without an injury. It's the same with fatigue, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and dizziness and ringing in the ears. And, everyone needs to see doctors if they have symptoms. The last thing I or any doctor wants to do is miss some structural disorder that needs medical attention. We never want to miss that. But when you look carefully, very carefully, at the vast majority of people with these chronic symptoms that we're talking about, Raelan, the vast majority of people do not have the structural damage to account for, which is fantastic news, because that means you can actually obviously get better.
So what is happening for the many of us, myself included, that get all the tests done? Doctors are saying you're fine, and I'm saying I can barely get out of bed and I have these 19 symptoms. So what is happening there? Why do we feel so terrible if we're okay?
Because the brain is acting as if you're in severe danger. When you catch a virus, your brain makes you tired to put you in bed. It'll do that for 2 days or a week or whatever. So the brain is protecting us. It's there as a danger mechanism. And it turns out that danger mechanism is super ingrained in our brain. I mean, it's for, tens of thousands of years of human experience, that when you get an injury, your brain turns on pain in order to make sure you don't walk on a broken ankle. But it turns out that our brains are constructed so that emotional injuries activate the same parts of the brain as does a physical injury. This is mind-blowing. And it's completely true, and it's based on neuroscience. We've got tons of studies showing that emotional injury activates parts of the brain the same as a physical injury. So the pain that occurs from an emotional injury is real because it's the same pain as you would get from a physical injury. The fatigue that one gets from an emotional injury or from stressful life situations is the same as fatigue you can get from having severe heart or lung disease. So the point is that it's completely real. And the point is that our brain has the capacity to do that. It has the capacity to create 10 out of 10 pain, 10 out of 10 fatigue, can't get out of bed, can't sleep, so anxious that you can barely move, so depressed that you can't even think, so dizzy that you can't stand up, and still be the brain. And that's because that's how our brain works. It's just exactly how it works. And so recognizing that is just a huge step toward helping people get better.
So that's why of the many people I interview, I hear things like, I had a bad car accident and then I got all these symptoms, or I got a bad virus and I just never recovered, or I had the death of a loved one and all of a sudden I wasn't doing well, or, severe financial, stress on the family.
Yeah.
Because it's fascinating to see how are all of these different things leading to the same place, but it's because it's the exact same neural pathways in the brain that are activated.
Yeah, same circuits in the brain, because everyone knows if you stand up in front of an audience of 100 people, have to give a speech, your stomach might turn into knots. That's a mind-body reaction. Everyone knows if you have a stressful day at work, you can have a headache. There's no disease in your head. When I started my internship, I had diarrhea for 6 months. I mean, my brain was causing it. It wasn't a disease in my gut. My brain was causing, because of the fear of being a young doctor, was causing diarrhea, something real that was actually happening in my body. And the brain has the power to do that. And so when someone gets in a car accident or hits their head or gets a virus and the symptoms don't go away, that's because the symptoms have become learned. That's because the circuits in the brain were turned on by the original injury and then didn't get turned off. And why didn't they get turned off? Well, there's two main reasons. One reason is that they became learned and they became reinforced. Well, how do symptoms become learned? Because the brain automatically does it. But how do they get reinforced? They get reinforced by our reaction to the symptoms. When our reaction to the symptoms is like, yeah, I'll get better, I'll be fine, no problem, they're more likely to go away. When our reaction is, oh my God, I could have this forever. Oh my goodness, this I knew somebody who had this forever and it never went away. Oh my goodness, I can't handle it, I can't take it, it's overwhelming. Those reactions are normal reactions to have, normal thoughts, but they send feedback to the brain because our brain is sending out signals to us. The signal is fatigue, pain, etc. And its response that we give it is, oh, it's okay, we're safe, or, oh my God, we're in horrible danger. When you tell your brain you're in danger, it makes the symptoms worse. And most people, if they look closely, when they've had this viral infection or they've had the car accident or whatever, they started getting the pain or the fatigue. Over time, it got worse. How can it get worse, right? You think about it. If you have the injury, and you say, well, it didn't heal, it wouldn't get worse. It may not get better, but it wouldn't get worse. But most people get worse. And their symptoms spread. So it starts out with fatigue, and then their brain adds dizziness, and it adds, ringing in the ears, and it adds anxiety and insomnia. And all of a sudden, people feeling like, oh my God, I'm so broken. I'm so broken. But this is the vicious cycle of the symptom leading to a reaction, a fearful and worried reaction, which makes it worse over time. So that's one mechanism. The other mechanism is stress in people's lives at the time of the injury, at the time of the virus, at the time of the situation. There was so much going on in their life in terms of their kids or their spouse or their job or the whole society falling apart or whatever, that triggers the danger signal and makes things get worse over time.
So essentially, some sort of threat assessment, whether physical or emotional, was the trigger, and then fear is the fuel.
Exactly.
that keeps it going.
Exactly. You said that well. I could have said it a little quicker, I suppose.
You probably did. I'm probably quoting you to you from somewhere that you just don't recall. You mentioned in your book, Unlearning Your Depression and Anxiety, that there are typically three components that create these conditions. So priming events, triggering events, and your specific personality traits. So how does that all factor into what you were just talking about?
Right. Well, the priming event we just talked about, the infection, the injury, the triggering events are learned. And so what happens is when you get a symptom, let's say it's fatigue, and what triggers the fatigue? Well, you're starting to have fatigue, and then one day you're walking, and then walking triggers the fatigue, and then maybe a certain food might trigger it, or a certain temperature or the weather might trigger it, or things like that. And those are learned responses or conditioned responses, basically like Pavlov and his dogs. And it's amazing to see that happen. And people begin to, and then what happens, it's so sad, because what happens is they start closing their life in, doing less and less out of fear of provoking the symptoms. And who wouldn't want to do that? You don't want the symptoms, you want to avoid them. But doing less and less actually teaches the brain that these triggers, it gives more power to these triggers. And so people may get headaches after chocolate or red wine. They may get stomach pain after certain foods, so they start restricting their diet. They stop eating gluten and dairy and all sorts of stuff and other foods, and their diet can be more and more restricted. Or they do walk. With fatigue, it's often exercise or walking, and then they're told, "Oh my God, don't get your heart rate above 100. That'll ruin you. You'll be in bed for a long time when you do that." And so it creates more and more fear. And so that's what triggers are. And what we do, one of the things we do, like for example with POTS, we have people who, with POTS, typically you get dizzy when you stand up. And the dizziness is due to the brain. It's a conditioned response. You stand up, your brain says, time to make you dizzy. It's not because of your heart or your blood pressure or your lungs or the blood flow to the brain, because the blood pressure doesn't drop in POTS. In fact, the heart rate goes up when you stand up. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure doesn't drop. You're getting more blood flow to your brain, not less. Anyway, that's part of the science behind it. So what we would do is we would have someone close their eyes and imagine standing up. And when they imagine standing up, they start to get fearful. They start to get tense. They may start to get dizzy. And then we go, oh, see, your brain is really afraid of standing up. With fatigue, we have people imagine going outside and walking, and they start to get tired, and they start to get fearful. And it's showing them, it's demonstrating to them that their brain is afraid. And that's the actual cause. It's not the actual walking or the standing. With back pain, it might be the moving or twisting, etc. So now what we can do as part of our treatment plan is we can start teaching people to lower the triggers, to reduce those triggering events. And that can be a huge entree into reversing the symptoms.
And then you mentioned personality traits as well, which is something we talk a lot about here. So tell us about that.
Well, people who have had difficulties in their life often learn that they don't count, often learn they don't matter. They often learn that something bad could happen to them and no one's going to be there for them. They often learn that everyone else is more important and they shouldn't rock the boat. They often learn that they don't get praise, so they need to be perfect in order to get praise. And so these kind of personality traits, when they're adaptive, they make sense. Be perfect, don't rock the boat, But over time, you learn that your needs aren't going to be met. You learn to be self-critical. You learn to be hard on yourself. You need to do so many things, put so much pressure on yourself to be super person and common in women need to be super women because they're with their kids and their job and their partners and parents and their siblings and their neighbors and the PTA, and they're just trying to be so good. And they're great, great people, but that puts pressure on yourself, and your brain recognizes that pressure, or can recognize that pressure as dangerous, as a threat. And that can make the symptoms worse. And so a lot of times, and this is the weirdest thing about this work in some ways, is that it's an opportunity. And when you lead with that, you say, "Oh, this is a great opportunity for you. You're going to get strangled." To the doctor, people are going to be really mad at you. But once people understand what's going on and why their brain did this, not to betray them, but to protect them, to help them, and maybe even to guide them. Wow, that can be an opportunity to grow as a person. I mean, there's something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Whereas stress causes people to have all these horrible reactions to it. And we like to turn it around and say, maybe there's a post-traumatic growth possibility here. And that is so moving, so amazing when I see people who take, not only are they getting rid of their symptoms, but on top of it, they're changing how they treat themselves. Maybe they're standing up for themselves the first time and saying, "Hey, these are my needs." Maybe they're standing up to their partner and saying, "Hey, we don't have an equal relationship. I think we can do better."
Yeah, I sometimes feel for the people who watch my channel and channels like this, and I think they sometimes are thinking, if Raelan tells me that I'm going to be grateful for this experience one more time, I am going to lose it. But I can't count how many people I've interviewed who have said, not only has it completely transformed who they are, but they're actually grateful for the experience. And these are people who hit low lows where they thought about taking their own life, where they thought about giving up. It's not that it wasn't serious. It's not that it wasn't hell, but it is such a process of internal transformation for most of us to get past this. And we come through
and most of the time it starts with compassion.
Yeah.
Most of the time it starts with caring, and, people who feel they don't deserve to be happy or don't deserve X, Y, or Z, it's because of some difficulty in self-compassion that they didn't learn. And when their family doesn't believe that their symptoms are real, when their doctors don't believe their symptoms are real, there's no compassion there. That's hurting them. And so this kind of view of compassion all around, because compassion creates safety. And what helps people recover from these neuroplastic or mind-body conditions is safety, feeling safe in their lives, in their bodies, with themselves, with who they are. And that's why our treatments, the pain reprocessing therapy treatment, where we help people change the neural circuits in their brain by lowering the fear and the focus on the symptoms, by doing these graded exposure exercises, as I was saying, where we expose them to the situation with standing or walking, and then do it a little bit more, but through the lens of safety and compassion and even joy of walking, if they can get to that point, or joy of standing. And then the other treatment, the emotional awareness and expression therapy that we've developed, is a way of dealing with the underlying emotions that may be hanging on. People tend to hang on to grudges, low-level anger about ways that they've been mistreated. And if you've been mistreated, you should be angry. But what do you do with that anger? Holding it in hurts oneself. Sending it out in the real world creates violence, and you can go to jail. Not good. So how do we deal? And that's what EAET is all about, is helping people to express their feelings, their anger, their guilt, their sadness in ways that are powerful but therapeutic in a safe environment, so that the emotions come out, they get processed, and then they can move toward resolving them to feel safer in their emotional life.
I know you talk about as well how our early life and childhood experiences can impact, our susceptibility to these sorts of conditions as adults. So what is the connection there?
Yeah, well, the connection there is that early life experiences teach us everything that we know. And so if you're brought up in a safe, environment, you learn that you are safe. If you're brought up in a critical environment, you learn that you're not worth it, and you learn to criticize yourself. And that leads to those personality traits. If you grew up in an environment where people didn't care about your needs or neglected you, then you feel abandoned, and you learn that abandonment and betrayal is common. And then you grow up, and then you lose a job, or you lose a partner, or somebody mistreats you. There's neglect, or there's abandonment, there's criticism, and that can trigger the danger signal in the brain to create these kinds of symptoms, again, that are real, but that are caused by the brain. So it's that it's so amazing when you see that, this mirroring effect, where someone may have had certain experiences in childhood that got mimicked or mirrored later in life, a similar kind of experience that just triggered that danger signal in the brain to send an alarm, like a smoke alarm. And the smoke alarm has got to be loud to be heard. And that's why the symptoms can be so severe.
Yeah, I used to hear a lot of people talk about things like, they had abusive childhoods or grew up in war conditions, and things that were very easy to understand. Okay, I could see how this would keep you on high alert and assessing the world through a lens of danger.
Right.
But more and more talking to people who it was just their childhood value came from, the accolades, the achievements that they got. Like every time I see a bumper sticker now, a well-meaning one that says, "I'm the parent of an honor student," I think this is what wires so many of us to think, I'm not okay, I'm not safe, I don't have value until I collect enough accolades. I run marathons, I get enough degrees. And even when we get there, we do our 10-second victory lap, and then it's like, it's not good enough. Now I need one more. So it's just fascinating to see all the different things that can lead us to this place.
Exactly.
Being on high alert.
Very well said. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens, is that one of my friends wrote a book called Chasing Peace, Tom Rothschild, and it's really about, this guy was super high achieving. Then he ended up crashing and burning with all these horrible symptoms, no idea why. And then he's like, well, I need to meditate. Okay, I'm going to be the best meditator ever, right? So it was really he really taught him. He really had to do soul searching in terms of who he was, and basically, are you good enough as you are? One of Joni Mitchell's songs is, "Will you take me as I am?" And, can we do that to ourselves? Can we take ourselves as we are? And that's why this work can have such profound implications for people, because the feeling of being okay with who you are and where you are, and knowing that you're not perfect, and knowing that you make mistakes. And, I tell my wife, like, I made a mistake like 10 years ago, I make mistakes. And she just laughs, because I make mistakes every day. And, if we can laugh with ourselves, if we can laugh at ourselves, if we can laugh with others, if we can enjoy life. I'm showing my age because now I'm going to quote a song from James Taylor. He said, "The secret of life is enjoying the passing of time." What an amazing thing to think about, as opposed to the secret of life, pushing yourself harder and harder.
And I love the accepting the imperfection and not feeling like you always have to fix everything, because I think sometimes we push out, suppress, whatever you want to call it, don't acknowledge all the things in our life. Like, ooh, maybe my relationship has some issues I need to address, or maybe I have some addictions, or there are some financial issues, and I'm just going to put my head in the sand. But it's okay to just give it space. Be like, yeah, I've got all these things. I don't need to fix them all today. It's okay. Yes, we've all got our stuff.
Yeah. Which comes back to compassion, being compassionate for yourself, and being compassionate for others. So that's, if someone says, well, what's the fastest way to get rid of neuroplastic symptoms? First is recognize they are neuroplastic. Recognize they actually are mind-body, and that you're not damaged or you're broken. Mm-hmm. Once you do that and recognize they're real and it's not your fault and you're not crazy, and recognize that you don't have to fix them because you're not broken. Once you do that, if you can worry less about the symptoms, worry less about them, and start to live your best life, live your fullest life, that's the quickest way to get better.
And I know this, and logically it makes sense to me, and I talk about this on the channel. But one thing I struggle with, and other people bring up as well, is this concept of outcome independence. So I'm not trying to fix myself. I'm not invested in what's going to happen. I'm not trying to change the future. but I am, because I don't want to be in pain and suffering all the time. And I'm trying to get rid of these symptoms. So how do you balance those two competing, that cognitive dissonance that
It's hard.
exists?
It's hard sometimes because the symptoms can be so severe and they're so annoying and disabling and debilitating that you focus on them all the time. But you want to start little. There was a woman that one of my doctor friends treated who was bedbound and horrible pain all over and fatigue. And the only thing she could do was move her hands. But she started moving her hands. And she started moving her hands to music. So she was doing finger dancing. And, how's that going to solve anything? But it was an intention of doing something that gave her joy, doing something that she could do, and not being so totally consumed by her symptoms for the time she was doing that. So she did that, and then she did a little more, and then she started dancing with her arms, and she started getting out of bed, and she could sway her hips, and eventually it took her 2 years to get better. It was a long process, but the way she approached it was little by little, doing the best she could, gradually exposing herself to a little bit more, worrying outcome independence is worrying less about the symptoms and taking control of what you can control. And the only thing you can really control in this world is your attitude. The only thing you really can control is your attitude and how you think about things. And that's, again, just to date me, that's the huge lesson that Viktor Frankl taught us when he wrote Man's Search for Meaning after getting out of a concentration camp in World War II. Was the Nazis could control everything about him. He was a concentration camp prisoner, but they couldn't control his attitude. They couldn't control his mind. And that is one of the most powerful lessons that one can have and one can learn. If you truly believe you can control how you think and what your attitude is. And the fact that you're not really broken, you can get better, you believe you're going to get better, you're going to do whatever you can to get better. You're not going to do it all today, but what you can do today is live with as little fear and focus on your symptoms and as much movement toward feeling safe, as much movement toward feeling connection to other people, much movement toward finding joy in the tiniest things in your life, because when you do that, you're training your brain out of the danger signal and you're training your brain towards safety and harmony. And it's just simple as neuroscience. Neurons that fire together wire together. And when you do more and more activity, you're saying, well, I'm going to push through. I got to walk, so I'm going to push through. But you're doing it with stress and fear and trauma while you're walking. That's actually training the brain that it's dangerous to walk. So if you can walk, maybe you can only walk 2 steps without fear. Maybe you can only walk 2 steps with joy in your heart. Maybe you can only walk 2 steps with a lightness. Do that, because that's training your brain in those 2 steps to turn off the danger signal with walking. And then maybe you can do 4 steps and you can go from there.
So it's not that you don't care about the outcome, that you have to stop wanting a future that you're symptom free and aiming for that, but it's about just staying in this moment that you're in and knowing that your power is just in what can bring me some joy right now, some safety, instead of how do I fight this? How do I stop this?
Right, because you can't fix something in the future and you can't fix something in the past. You can only fix something right now in the present.
Yes. One person I interviewed said something like that just beautifully. Recovery started happening for me when I realized that my key to recovery didn't exist in some moment in the future. It wasn't in some future book I was going to read or some video. Of course, you can keep learning and researching, but my key to recovery was right now, this second, right now that I'm living. This is where it happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a hard lesson. It's hard to do. And, people struggle. It's not easy. It's not easy to do this. No one says it's easy. It's relatively simple, which is disarming sometimes, but it is not necessarily easy. And my heart goes out to all the people who are suffering, and my hope and compassion goes out to them that they can get better. And that's what we live for. And that's why doing this work for this last 23 years has been so gratifying, because people are so grateful. You saved my life, Dr. Schubiner. Well, I didn't save anybody's life. I didn't do anything. But I helped give them the understanding and the knowledge that they could use on their recovery journey.
Without question, the overwhelming majority of people who I interview who fully get past this use this sort of approach to get to recovery. With that being said, there are people that reach out to me and say, I've tried this, it isn't working for me, this doesn't apply to me. So, are there cases where there are other things that people need to do, or what is happening in those, outliers or whatever we want to call them, where people just aren't finding that this approach is getting them the results that other people are seeing?
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating when that happens, because you read the stories and, oh, I got better. Oh, I got better. I did this. I did that. I got better. But it's not happening for me. And, what I do in those situations is I go back to the beginning. I go back to the basics. What is the problem? Are we sure that there's no medical or structural problem? Let's just review that. Make sure we're all on, that something hasn't been missed. Let's go back and look at your understanding of it, and your understanding of the neuroscience of it, and your understanding of it. What are your doubts? What are your fears? So many people harbor a lot of doubts and fears that are just stuck in the back of their mind. Oh, maybe it's that sugar I've been eating. I've been eating sugar, and that's probably doing it. Or I've been eating wheat, or I've been pushing it a little too much, or this doctor said my nerve was damaged, or my back was damaged, or my brain was not getting enough blood, or my mitochondria are diseased, right? So there's so many ways that people can live in medical fear from what they've been told. So let's review all that and make sure that there's not something there that people are really worried about, and get the information and address those, seriously and honestly. And then, how well are they able to do this moment by moment thing? Can we work on the smaller moments, break it down to that level of treatment? And then another thing we can look at, well, what about the emotional processes? Maybe people have done the trying to change the neural circuits in their brain, but they really haven't looked at the emotional processes, how they're feeling, where their sadness or grief is being held. If they're feeling guilt, if they're hanging on to guilt for a long time, that can be the key. If they're holding on to low-level anger, that can be the key. If they still feel unsafe, their child, so to speak, their child feels unsafe from childhood trauma, their own child, their inner child, so to speak, feels unsafe from childhood trauma. So that's another area that sometimes is missed. And then finally, it's what we were talking about before, the personality traits. How are you really treating yourself? Are you saying, oh, I'm a failure? That's a common one. Oh, I'm a loser. I'm a failure. I can't do this. Everybody else can, but I can't. Where does that come from? So those are some of the things that I would suggest to people when they're not having the rapid or the expected recovery. And sometimes it's patience. And sometimes it's really just stopping trying to get better, stopping trying to do the things. So a lot of people, times I see, well, I'm meditating, I'm journaling, I'm exercising, I'm doing all these things, but they're doing it all to get better, because that's the outcome. They're always focused on getting better. And that can put pressure on their danger signal in their brain. So maybe they need to step back and say, I'm going to stop trying to get better and start focusing on what I can do in my life, in my community, in my family, for other people, with my pets. What can I do that will bring me purpose and meaning? So that's another thing as well.
Very well said. And it got me thinking, another thing that people tell me that it's just an important message to put out there, that this is a completely new way of thinking for most of us. And it's okay if once you do the research and you learn the science, you still have some doubts, or you're not always every day fully there. Just be curious. You don't have to be 100% positive and believe in the process and every minute of every day, and it can still work. You can still be struggling and still getting better, and it's okay to have doubts. Everybody does. That's okay.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that you're not going to get there.
And a lot of it too is thoughts. People, not only is our danger signal in our brain giving us symptoms of fatigue, insomnia, anxiety, depression, pain, but it's also giving us scary thoughts. The brain causes what we think. And so we think that our thoughts are ours, but our thoughts are actually our brain's. So if people can begin to understand that process, that our thoughts are coming from our brain, and our scary thoughts and doubtful thoughts and worrying thoughts and thoughts all about the future and thoughts all about the past are just thoughts. They're not actually reality. They're not important. They're just thoughts that our brain is throwing at us. And if you can begin to step back from your thoughts and see that your thoughts are driving reactions in your body, but they're not your thoughts, they're your brain's. And that is an amazing process that sometimes can be the key to getting past this by stepping back from thoughts. Thoughts are coming from your brain, they're not reality. And so that is really really important thing that oftentimes gets missed in the process.
Something else that I learned from you that I haven't heard about from anybody else or read anywhere else, because we talk about the fight or flight response, but you also talk about the freeze and submit processes and how they can manifest with fatigue and depression. So this is a brand new concept to me. So I imagine it is to a lot of people. So what is happening there?
Yeah, it's just part of the ingrown nature of how our brains and bodies have developed over these thousands and thousands of years. And so, fighting is anger. We need anger. We need to fight when we're being attacked. If we're being chased, we need to run. So we have fear. So fear is a running response. We need the freeze response to stop. If someone's lurking or something, this freeze response is a safety mechanism, and the submit response is like to play dead, go to bed and lie down and just cover your head in the blanket. And so those responses are adaptive, they're helpful in emergency situations, but because our brain knows there's responses for emergency situations, it can turn them on in non-physically emergency situations, but emotionally emergency situations. And so it just explains it. I think it helps people understand the power that the brain has over us to create all sorts of symptoms, from muscle tension and headache, and to diarrhea, to severe depression, to feeling numb and paralyzed, feeling anxious. All those things are just part of our heritage, really, of what our brain has learned over these thousands of years that we carry within us.
Yeah, I just think it's so helpful to understand that symptoms like anxiety and depression can be in that bucket with everything else, because most of us think of them as a result of, well, of course, I'm going through something difficult. The depression and the anxiety is inevitable. That's separate. Right. And will magically go away once I fix this. But it's just another tool of our brain.
Yeah, it's just another warning sign, so to speak. Another way that our brain is sending out a message. And it's just so important to think of our brain not as betraying us and harming us, but our brain is actually trying to guide and trying to protect us in some way, shape, or form. But it doesn't speak English. It can't tap you on the shoulder and say you need to do X, Y, or Z. You need to treat yourself differently. You need to change your job. You need to, do whatever. But you need to express your feelings. But it just sends out this message. And we have to think of the brain as kind of like a scared child. I often say it's like a scared child lying in bed, fearful of a monster in the closet. And we want to open the closet door and say, look, there's no monster. We want to say to our brain, look, we're not actually physically damaged or broken. And then we want to lie down with that child and give them caring and love and a story and a hug. And that's kind of how we have to treat our brain as well. Move it toward safety as opposed to danger. And there's a lot of ways to do that. That's why there's so many. That's why you're doing your work to teach people. You're interviewing people who have tried lots of different ways and nuances about that. We've written all sorts of books. I'm writing a new book now that's going to be big and have all sorts of stuff in it. And that's our job, is to find the key that'll help people. Sometimes it's a click moment. Sometimes it's you like you say, you're living in doubt and fear, and you're worrying, and you're not getting better. And all of a sudden, if you're paying attention, you may have one moment where all of a sudden you realize, hey, I didn't really do anything, but now I'm really so tired. And the other day I did more and I was less tired. click. It's not how much I'm doing. It's something else.
Something else.
That click moment can make a huge difference.
This has been absolutely incredible. It's just so much information packed into such a short amount of time. I'm so grateful for you. I can't tell you how many I've done now, hundreds of interviews, and you are mentioned all the time as a key component of people's recoveries. And the amazing thing is that you are so accessible and you have so much free support. I know you have a free course on Coursera. You have, information on your website. You have 3 amazing books. All of this for people listening and watching will be linked in the description. So definitely check it out because Dr. Schubiner has a ton of information out there and is just helping thousands and thousands of people to feel better. So thank you so much for all that you do. I don't even have the words to express properly the gratitude I have for the impact you're having on so many of us out there that are struggling and need this.
That's so kind. That's so kind. I appreciate it so much. And that's what gives me and all the people doing this work inspiration, to keep going and do more. And so thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for people watching, I'll link a full recovery playlist here if you're just looking for a dose of hope. A good chance they're going to mention Dr. Schubiner in it. But sometimes, you just need that if you're having a rough day. Or sometimes you just need to hear it explained in a different way. So I'll put that up there if people are looking for something else. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Raelan. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's watching. I really appreciate you as well and hope to see you in one of these next interviews from this playlist.